Hey guys, welcome back to my kitchen. Today we're going to be making sourdough discard sandwich bread. So I have a couple different sandwich breads that I like to make. One is an active starter recipe, and then this one is a discard recipe. So this means that this recipe is going to use yeast for it to rise, but we're going to be adding in the discard, which is like an unfed starter, so that we can get the flavor and the health benefit of the sourdough without having to do the full overnight or all day process of baking. This recipe I love because it can be done in less than 3 hours. So it's super convenient if you're short on time, or if you're a busy mom, or you're just suddenly like, I'm out of bread, I need to get some bread in this house. We can do this in an afternoon versus taking a day or overnight. So the recipe that I have, I'll link in the description of this video, but the recipe that I have for this bread can make one big loaf. If you have a bigger loaf pan, it can make one loaf, or if you have small loaf pans, it can be divided into two and make 2 small loaves. I've just found that my loaf pans are on the smaller side, and for my family, 2 small loaves is perfect because it makes smaller pieces of bread, so I can just do small sandwiches because I have little kids. So I'm excited. Let's get started.
So we're going to start out with our KitchenAid mixer bowl. We're going to pour in 1 cup of warm water, and the warm water is going to help our yeast to activate. And then we're going to add in 1 to 2 tablespoons of honey. This is just based on your preference for flavor, how sweet you like your bread. But we're going to mix this up because the combination of the warm water and the honey is going to help our yeast to activate. After we get that mixed up, we're going to add in 2 1/4 teaspoons of dry active yeast. If you're using the individual packets, this would be 1 packet. Once we get this poured in, I like to give mine a little bit of a stir just to make sure that it gets mixed in good. And we're going to just let this sit for about 5 minutes until it's bubbly and activated. Okay, 5 minutes later, we're going to come back. You can see that the yeast is bubbly and active. So we're just going to go ahead and add in the rest of our ingredients. We're going to do a teaspoon of salt and 4 tablespoons of softened butter. I accidentally melted this butter, but that's fine, it'll work too. And then we're gonna add in 3/4 of a cup of sourdough discard. You can see from this video that the measurement of the discard doesn't have to be exact. I usually just scoop and I don't like level anything. In this case, I only have 1/4 cup measuring cup, so I'm doing 3 of them. And as you can tell, it's just a very rough estimate. All right, and then after we get this last 1/3 cup in, we're going to do 3 cups of all-purpose flour. I haven't experimented with this doing fresh milled yet, but I plan to, so for now I just know that it works with all-purpose flour. For mixing up bread, we're going to attach our dough hook. This is what the dough hook looks like with the KitchenAid mixer. And then once we get that on, we're going to put it down and be sure to lock it in place. I always make sure when I'm doing dough in my KitchenAid that I lock the machine because the dough is going to get thick and you want it to stay in place. And we're just going to let the KitchenAid do all the work. We're going to turn it on low speed and we're going to knead it for 10 to 15 minutes until the dough is nice and stretchy. If you stretch it out, it should pass what we call the window pane test. And as the dough mixes, you'll see here it kind of jumps to what it should look like. It'll start pulling the dough away from the bowl, and your bowl should actually be fairly clean. So this is kind of what the right texture looks like with your dough. And then after about 10 to 15 minutes of kneading, we're going to take our dough off the hook. Sometimes I like to get my hands wet so that it doesn't stick to it. And you can kind of see here that it should be nice and stretchy when you pull it away from the hook. And you should be able to stretch it thin without breaking it. Next, we're just going to cover this with some plastic wrap. You can put it in a separate bowl if you prefer, but with my KitchenAid, I just like to cover the whole entire bowl, and we're going to let it double in size. This takes about 1.5 hours, and you can see here in the video that this is over doubled in size, and it's been a little bit over 1.5 hours. So next, we're going to make sure to oil our bread pans. I use 2 smaller glass bread pans, and so I split my dough into 2 pieces, and we're going to make 2 small loaves. I've got kids, so the small loaves are a perfect size for us, but you can also do 1 larger bread pan and make 1 bigger piece. Your slices of bread will be bigger if you go with this option. Now we're just going to set these aside. I like to get a little bit of flour on the back of my hand so that I can punch down this dough. Look at that. It's deflating beautifully. And then I like to get a bunch of flour on the counter. I actually do less flour when it's on my countertop, but this is a table that I use for recording and it does tend to stick here. So I do more flour on the surface, and then I'm just going to take the dough out of the bowl, get as much as I can, and we're just going to pull it out onto the table surface. So once we get the dough out on the counter, I like to get some flour in my hands. We're going to cut this dough in half because, again, I'm doing 2 smaller loaves, and we're just going to begin to shape our loaves. So I like to flatten it out pretty flat, and then we're just going to fold over the 2 longer sides, and then we're going to roll up the smaller side into a ball shape. So I kind of just shape this like I would my traditional sourdough loaf, and then after I get it into a nice ball, building tension on the top, then I'm going to just work it to make it into a rectangle shape. I kind of found just tucking the sides under each other, still building tension, and kind of rolling it back and forth helps it to get into a rectangle shape while keeping that tension on top. And then after we get it into an oval shape, we're just going to put it into the pan seam side down. Now we're going to do the exact same thing with the second loaf. Once we get them both into the pans, we're just going to cover it with a lightweight towel, and we're going to let it rise for about 30 minutes. So here's what they'll look like about 30 minutes later. You'll see that they've puffed up. If you poke the loaf, they should kind of hold the indent for a second and then slowly bounce back. Now we're going to bake the loaves at 375 degrees for about 40 to 45 minutes. And then they're going to come out, they're going to be very hard on top, but they should be nice and browned. And right after they come out, we're going to spread butter on top of them. Do a generous amount. This is going to help them to soften as they cool. So it'll sound hollow and hard. Don't be alarmed. But as they cool, they're going to get a lot softer. So you can see here that I just like to use a stick of butter and rub the whole entire top of the loaf until it gets nice and buttery. And you can see here when I poke the loaf that they've softened up quite a bit. And then I'm going to take them out of the loaf pans to cool on the rack. Once they are fully cooled, then you can slice your bread and enjoy. This is the softest, most cloud-like bread that you will find. It's perfect for sandwiches, for toast, and I hope that you love this bread as much as my family does. Be sure to subscribe to my channel for more on sourdough and baking.